Miss Recorder, we're ready to get going. Okay, let's open up our work meeting for April 2nd, 2020 at 5:33 p.m. Council, do you have any reports? Being that there's so much that we can do right now. I know. Anybody have any reports? Okay.
Pull it up real quick.
Remember to speak into the mic so that everyone can hear.
Here.
Anybody else have any while he's pulling that up?
You got her?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, the Parks Department, they've shut down all the playground equipment and that. They put tape or whatever you call it around it. So that's, you know, I don't know if they've shut down tennis courts. They have. I knew they were talking about it. And so, but anyway, they're making good progress to keep where more people can congregate, you know. The open fields, that's kind of nice for family. Can go out there and just, you know,
Kick a ball
especially if
around.
you're in an apartment, you know, you can get out and breathe. So
Okay.
just letting you know that
They're on top of it.
I think they're doing a good job that way. Yeah.
Davis Arts Council had their recent board meeting, and obviously they had a lot of discussion about budgeting and about what they would do in different contingencies. And Tessa does a great job. She had some great information to share with the board, and it was very informative about comparing this to potentially 2008, how they managed that recession period in terms of funding. They also announced their yearly schedule, so you can still go on and purchase tickets up until the end of April. And then if there's cancellations or anything, they can refund the money or work out some sort of arrangement. But I was just very impressed with her work and with the work of the board. So they're continuing. Everybody's trying to figure out how to deal with this in this new world we live in the last few months, the last few weeks. So just very, very happy to see what Tess is doing with Davis Arts Council.
Good. Thanks, Zach. I appreciate you attending those meetings because I know that it's, you know, it's good interaction and letting us know what's happening, and especially this year for them not being able to have a major celebration in the announcement, so they had to rely on it all to be online. So we'd highly encourage everyone to buy season tickets if you don't have some already, because that's really pretty inexpensive for a season. So, Mr. Morris, do you have an announcement?
I don't have an announcement, just to maybe piggyback on what Dave talked about with with what we're going through. I've had folks reach out to me as far as gathering goes, talking about having quarantine parties in people's driveways, which probably shouldn't be happening. Talking about neighborhood Easter egg hunts being planned. And as far as our communication for the Davis County, the new public health order, anything we can do, anything that this group can do, or on the website, as far as communication and letting families know and people know that the gathering that can take place now is just families, and that's immediate family, not extended family, not friends, and are also, we have parents talking, complaining about teenagers running around and everyone being together. And if we want to curb this, if we want to be part of the solution, we need to continue to beat the drum of flattening the curve and following the order. The governor's was a directive and didn't really have teeth to it. The order has teeth to it, and not that we are going to go around and police and give tickets and those sorts of things, but to educate and let people know that this is what is in the order, this is what we should be doing to help get us through this as quickly as we can to help bring back where we were and a sense of normalcy. And frankly, we're asymptomatic people can spread this, and we don't know if we have it. And if we are following the order, we're going to be safe at home. It's probably our best bet to be safe at home. If we are gathering and doing these things against the order, well, then we're putting others at risk. And you might just have a sniffle and a cough and be just fine. But there are risk groups that they get it, and now they're in the hospital, and worse. So anything we can do, anything this group can do, please continue to, as people reach out, let them know what this order means and what it doesn't mean, and help to communicate, since we're here to represent the residents, and we're here to help protect the people here in Layton and let them know. And the best thing we can do is communicate and be open and transparent, and be forthcoming with all the information that we have, and again, to be part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Well, along those lines, the definition then of a family is under one roof, so that people really need to understand that. And I would highly encourage everybody just to continue to get on our website. We've got that logo on the landing page, and we need to really kind of encourage everybody to just stay informed there, as well as once we have our updates are posted, then we can repost and really kind of, help that, make sure everybody understands that. Yes, Patrick,
Well,
did you have?
Yeah, I think
comment?
having worked in public health, I think one of the things that's going to help is, Salt Lake and Summit were kind of isolated in their decision. And then I felt yesterday when we went, Davis County, we were still somewhat isolated. But Weber Morgan and Utah County and Bear River Health Department all issued their orders today as well. So I think the more these orders that are issued, I think people are going to realize the gravity and maybe have a better understanding of what they're supposed to do in them.
And there's a lot of similarities there too, which is nice, so that it isn't confusing for anybody living in Weber County versus Davis County.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, not just what Councilman Morris said about making sure people are aware what they can't do, but making sure that they're aware what they can do. So I've been getting comments and questions about, what do I need to bring with me in my vehicle? Am I going to be stopped by the police? Can I go to work? And all these kinds of things that are just, they see orders, they don't understand maybe the whole concept behind them. They certainly haven't read it, but we have. And so it's our responsibility as elected officials to share that information where we can in the public sphere. And also, if anybody has any questions about what they can and can't do, refer it to us. If we can't answer it, we'll get someone that can answer it. But the more information, the better, so people don't feel that level of fear that life as they know it is completely stopping. We still want them to go to work. We still want them to be able to do things, to shop for essentials, to go to mandatory medical appointments and things like that. We just have to get the information out there.
Well, I think you guys are doing a great job there. I want to commend you all, as well as the staff and everybody here at the city has done their best as well. So as soon as we get the updates, we'll continue to make them available. Anything else? Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our budget discussion item for our fiscal year of 2020 and 2021. Tracy Porboat will lead that discussion, so go ahead.
Okay, Mayor, members of the council, thank you. So tonight we'll continue our discussion about the budget. We've talked about water, stormwater, sewer, and refuse in our last meeting. It took a few minutes, and it is important, even though we're in this stay-at-home type phase, it's still important for us to keep up on this budget. The city needs to run, and so I just state that because people out there might think, well, why are we talking about this when why is this important right this minute? Well, we do have a timeline process, and we do need to keep up with that. I mean, even though I'd like this part to be canceled for a little while, maybe, but it is very important that our funding be in place, because by state law, if we don't have an approved budget, we can't spend money. And if we can't spend money, we can't have emergency personnel out there. We can't have people to keep those kinds of things going. So that's why we're here tonight, keep this moving. We'll We'll start out just for a few minutes about the pool fund, and we'll go through some of these minor enterprise funds and then some special revenue funds that are mostly grant funded. The pool fund, this will be affected. I mean, the pool's closed right now, so this could change a little bit. We don't have numbers right this minute, but depending on how long this goes, it'll affect this budget. Like I mentioned to some council members before, I think last week, we do have the ability to amend the budget at any time. You know, we advertise it, we hold a public hearing, and we can amend the budget up or down anytime we want. We just have to follow the noticing requirements. So on the pool fund, the main change in personnel is mostly related to merit increases that are proposed at this point. The change in operations is related to some recommended training by the American Red Cross for the different lifeguards and water safety instructors. We have proposed a $550,000 transfer from the general fund. You'll notice that $550,000 does leave a balance for the current year, and so we could come back to you at the tentative budget and just propose a $500,000 transfer, which would leave it at about even. We do have some fund balance in that fund. $365,000 would be anticipated. $315,000 at the end of this year is what we anticipate. Now, again, that could go down because the pool's been closed for a bit and may be closed, for a while. So that fund balance may go down even this current fiscal year. Any questions about the pool fund? Kind of buzz through these a little bit because we've talked about them some, but in the emergency medical fund, we've anticipated an increase in revenue there. One, because calls have gone up significantly over the last year, over the last 6 or 8 months since we started the 2020 budget. We do have personnel increases for the proposed merit increase. Operations-wise, supplies and things like that, the more calls we go on, the more we use those supplies. They get, and they're expensive. There's also a power gurney in part of those operational equipment. And then capital equipment, there's a Type 1 ambulance, which is a full-blown ambulance, and some heart monitor type devices that go in those ambulances proposed in the capital projects. You'll notice that with those projects for this current year, that actually is more expense than revenue. So that brings our fund balance down a bit, but we are maintaining a healthy fund balance in that fund, anticipating it being $1.3 million at the end of 2021. The UIA Telecom Fund, we have about 180 contracts with residents. So at the beginning of the Utopia project, you could sign up on a 20-year, 30-year contract, and the city is responsible for those contracts. And so we collect those payments, and then we remit payment to UIA for those. In that, we have an administrative fee that we collect, and we use that to pay for our anchor installations that the city's responsible for in the city. So at this point, that's all this fund handles is those contract payments and the anchor connections that the city has throughout. Secondary water fund.
Question first, Tracy.
Sure.
So as the new Utopia thing, and people sign up in that Layton City part of it, will that go into that fund in the future?
If there's excess, it would be accounted for in that fund, yes. For the first while, any excess that's generated from that new agreement goes towards debt service. And then if they're on the new debt, and then if there's anything in addition to the debt service, it would roll back into this fund.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the debt service for UIA or debt service for Utopia?
UIA. So there's a UIA Layton bond that was issued a couple of years ago to build out the entire city.
Okay.
Ahead of the timeline that UIA was proposing by doing it themselves.
Okay.
And so the revenue generated off of the connections that were made under that build first goes to the city to pay for the debt. Actually, it goes to UIA and they cover the debt payment
They
for
cover
that
the
new
debt payment.
Right.
What's the
If
debt?
those new connections generate more income than that,
Right.
the contract has some calculations and things in it that would actually have some money coming back to the city under that arrangement.
What's the debt payment from UIA
I'm not sure what
UIA for the bond?
I'm not sure what that debt payment is off the top of my head.
$1 million, $2 million?
Probably $1 million, $1.5 million, something
Okay.
like that. I don't remember. And so for the record, I wouldn't want to
But it's over $1
say.
million bucks.
I'm sure it is. It was a
So-
$20 million bond, 20 million plus. Yeah.
So we're at 100, I didn't see it, 145,000? Did I misread? What are we bringing in right now?
Oh, this doesn't show any of that.
Oh, it doesn't?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry, I saw
No.
that at the bottom.
All that fund shows is just it kind of shows an in and out of payments on contracts that we have
Okay,
with
I'm sorry.
about 180 residents have contracts that they're paying over a long period of time to cover their connection. And that's really all we're accounting for in here at
Okay.
this point.
Okay,
And this doesn't even show the contracts because the contracts are on the balance sheet. They're not part of the budget. Secondary water is a contract with Weber Basin Water right now. That's really all we're accounting for in here. So per the contract, we keep track of our expenses, our personnel and operating expenses. We bill them. So these are just kind of estimates of what we think we'll spend. We know what we have in personnel. We've made an estimate in operations as far as repairs and things that we'll need to make. The main difference here is just our difference in personnel from one year to the next. We did have a little bit of a fund balance that got built up in here, and we're taking 23,000 of that in the 2021 budget to purchase a vehicle to be shared between secondary water and water. So secondary will pay 23,000 of it, the water fund will pay 23,000, and they'll have I believe it's a 1-ton vehicle that they'll be able to share between those services.
So I got to ask, why the increase from 2019 to 2020 versus the 21 budget?
In the
On
revenue?
operations, I'm looking at the operations line.
Because this is when we started it, so it was just the first year, and I don't think we had much as far as repairs and things.
So
So the 2020 budget, the operations went up more because we know we had more to repair. After our people went out, engineers went out, analyzed the system, identified everything that needed to be fixed, then we increased the budget for 2020 so that we could fix that, and Weber Basin, knowing that Weber Basin by contract will pay us back for that.
okay.
So my question is it's a decrease in salary from 19 to 20, but then in personnel, but then it goes up again in 21. So did we lose an employee? Did we take them half-time? I mean, does that not, are they not going to get that
Oh, the
personnel
other
get
thing that
their
you have here
raises?
is
or-
this would be an actual personnel expense, so there could have been some overtime.
Oh,
There could have
okay.
been some other things. This is 2020 is a budgeted expense, so that will just be strictly these two people's wages and benefits.
Plus their increase.
Really no concern for overtime or anything like that.
Okay, but that reflects the merit in that as well. Okay.
Yes. Any other questions on the secondary water?
Are you confident we're getting fully reimbursed for everything we spend?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we are. We're coding everything that those two people work on, or anyone else, if they have to bring a team in. We're coding all those expenses
Separate,
to
so-
this fund and
Okay.
tracking them that way.
But sometimes where you have shared labor and stuff, you're accounting for that way.
Yeah, I think we're trying the best we can. I mean, it kind of goes back and forth, right? And we do that with all of our departments. If they have an emergency and instead of just two people, 5 or 6 people have to jump on it for a couple of hours, we're not necessarily keeping track of it hour by hour. Our system doesn't allow us really to do that very well.
Yeah, and I understand that. I'm just asking if you're pretty confident that we're covering,
I think
that they're
so.
reimbursing us.
Yeah, I think we are. On the special revenue funds, so the Victim Services Fund, I believe you're familiar with that fund, deals with, the legal department handles that. They have a couple of employees, deals with domestic violence type issues and emergency housing. That grant, you will notice, went up significantly from 19 to 20 when they added another person to handle the emergency housing and those types of situations. Mainly the increase here is just a merit increase on the personnel in that fund, and we increased the transfer from the general fund a little bit to cover that. Alcohol Enforcement Fund, that's another state grant where we receive money at the police department in order for them to do DUI surveillance, different types of DUI observations, liquor store things. It's mostly an overtime type of account. And so the personnel that are assigned there, there is one police officer assigned to this function, and then there's some overtime that goes with that as well. We have the 911 Special Revenue Fund, so that's the dispatch center, 911 dispatch center. You'll notice this one, the revenue on this fund has, over the last couple of years, it's not keeping up with the expenses. A few years ago, maybe as many as 5, we used to, and before that, the revenue that was coming into this from the fees that are charged on the phone bills, that would actually allow us a little bit at a time to generate a capital fund so that we could buy some new consoles or equipment or upgrade the software. And at the same time, we would charge 35% of our police communications division to this fund. So it's always been subsidized by the general fund, but we were able before to charge 35%. In order to get the budget to balance this year, and you'll notice we don't have any capital projects for 2021, and in fact, we used up all of the fund balance. We anticipate using it all in 2020 that was there just to cover operations and personnel. So what I had to do, Alex and I discussed it, and we brought the percentage that's covered down to 28%. So what that means is that the general fund is now covering about $70,000 a year more than we were previously. Now, at some point, there may be a fee increase, the rates that we can charge or that are charged on the bill or however they divide that all up may get changed and help accommodate some of that difference. But for the 2021 budget, we did have to make that adjustment. Are there any questions about that? Okay. The Metro Strike Force, that's a narcotics strike force at Davis County. And so Layton is the sponsor of this program. And so we have to keep track of all the grant revenue, expenses, do all the reporting. We have a number of officers in it. I have a list of those of how many we contribute versus how many all the others contribute. I could probably read through that real quick if we wanted to. So in that, we manage it. We supply a lieutenant, a sergeant, and 2 agents, and the administrative assistant. So Layton provides 5 people. The Davis County Sheriff's Office provides a sergeant and 2 agents. Bountiful, Kaysville, and Clearfield and Syracuse each provide an agent. And then there are 7 agencies, law enforcement agencies, and 3 that don't have their own law enforcement agencies that all pay a fee. And the different chiefs of the departments got together and determined what the fee would be to make it equitable. So when you look up on the thing and it says there's 105,000 in assessments to cities, that's what the assessments to the cities are. The 385 comes from various different federal and state type grants, seizures grants, high trafficking drug type things, because most of what they do has to do with drugs and stuff like that. So we have personnel costs and other operational costs, and then capital project is just to replace some radio equipment this particular year.
The decrease from state and federal grants, was that merit-based that we didn't somehow meet a threshold, or did the budget change from federal and state to limit what we were receiving? Or
Some of those do go down, and you would see that in 2019, again, that's an actual number, so that's what we brought in. So throughout the year, if they're processing more cases, if they're on more high-profile cases, they will bring in more grant money actual. This 2021 is just an estimate of what they think they'll bring in this year based on kind of averages or what they would normally get. But they can bring in more if they do more cases. The CDBG fund, that grant actually did go down. You'll notice that it was 419, 557. 557 included some program income. So some people may have, if they were in the home buying program where they got a payment to help, down payment assistance, that's what it's called. In that program, if they sold their house early, then they had to pay that back. We throw that program income in here. There's some other program income that could come back into that as well, which could cause this 20 number to go up. But they did reduce the amount of the grant for 2021. That's based on the number of applications for public assistance. And so if those applications for public assistance go down in Layton, then our share of that grant goes down. And that's the case that has been reported to me. That being the case, some of these items that we participate in had to go down budget-wise. So you'll notice a little bit of change in some of those, from 202 down to 167. And the Davis School District project also going down. It's normally not 201,000. It's more like 80 to 100,000 that we participate in that project. But that also had to go down because of the reduction in the grant.
So Tracy, when is that 368 a confirmed amount, or knowing what's going on right now in Washington, is there a chance that that's going to be decreased before we ever really get it?
I believe that they've already received a confirmation on this amount.
Okay.
And so, because I had a different amount in here, and then I just went and talked to community development this
Okay.
last week. And I believe they presented their plan a month or so ago.
Yeah.
And this is the amount that's been confirmed for the upcoming year.
Okay. Hopefully it's still there.
I mean, yeah, anything could change. Who knows?
Just print some
But
money.
I think yeah. The RDA fund, now actual in 2019, 892. We would anticipate that going down. The 500,000 for 20 is probably just an estimate that I threw in there for this current year. But 2021, I would anticipate that going down. We know that the school district's participation went from 100% to 50%, so that's going to have an effect. We do have fund balance in that fund, though. We'd anticipate that it remain about $1.4 million. We have 500,000 set aside right now for the UTA parking structure per agreement, and we have some affordable housing money that's building over time as well that can go towards affordable housing type projects within the project area. The EDA, Special Revenue Fund, that wasn't affected because that area didn't expire like the RDA did. But so we anticipate a certain amount of revenue coming in from that. And you can also see that these payback agreements are just things that have been out there. This particular one is Keomac. That went down from the prior 2 years because the city has recuperated money that we put in. So we put money into this project area 10 years ago or whenever that was, maybe even almost 15 years ago. And as of last year, we had recouped the money that we were owed as a city from this project area. So the remaining is related to that one particular project. You can also see in this area that our fund balance for that project area is healthy, so that if there was a good opportunity for something, a good development that would produce great jobs and so forth, then we do have some funds available to participate in that. The impact fee fund, this will be one that I already changed my estimate on transportation for 2021, and I'll probably have to change it again because no one's driving anywhere, which coming to work has been fantastic, but I guess just from the drive part, not from the rest of it.
Right.
Because anyway. So those numbers I would anticipate dropping down a bit. Parks has always stayed at about this same level, even through the last recession. For some reason, Parks stayed where it was. And that's good because that level at about 425 is just enough to cover the bond payment that's out there for the park over on the west side. We're still paying on that bond for a few more years. And the main thing that this park impact fee is established to cover is that bond payment. We have been fortunate that there's been great building over the last few years, and so that has allowed us to develop a few other parks, based on the impact. We will be using some of the park impact fee fund balance and other funds to provide the combined funding to develop the park that's proposed in the capital in the capital facilities plan. We also have a significant amount for roads that's proposed to be spent, and then the bond payment there. As far as fund balances, it's anticipated we should be able to continue, even if these numbers drop, as far as the money coming in. We have very healthy fund balances in these because of all the development that's happened over the last 10 years. And so we should be able to continue easily with the projects that are programmed for 2021. We may have to revisit the schedule for 2022 and forward, just depending on how our whole current situation plays out and how long. Class C road funds. This will be another area that we could come back to you mid-year for an adjustment, although for 2021, I take that back, for 2021 we should be fine, right? We have $1.2 million in fund balance sitting there. We should be able to easily cover the amounts that are being budgeted. It may, depending on how the revenues come in, eat up that fund balance, but I would not anticipate a 50% decrease in revenue. That would be really extreme. So we should be good as far as that goes, the B and C road funds coming in and where we have proposed to spend them. Prop 1, again, the Prop 1 and ramp funds, when those started up a few years ago, we set those up so that we are almost a year in advance. So by the time we make awards, particularly for ramp, which will be the next slide, by the time we make awards in July, we already have 10 months of the revenue in the bank. We know what we got. And we can kind of estimate what we would get the next 2 months based on prior years. This year might be a little more tricky, but because we have that money in the bank already, I would anticipate, unless you advise otherwise, that we could continue on with the projects that have been recommended for the 2021 budget. 2022, we may have to adjust, and the amount available may be, significantly lower. I mean, it could be 10, 15, 20% lower, just depending on how things go. These funds and the ramp funds are a sales tax, but they're not on food. And so even though people right now are going to the grocery store, like crazy and buying lots of food, that doesn't really have a drastic effect on the amount of money available in these two categories. What does affect these would be car sales, other hard and durable goods, things that people aren't buying. So that'd be Prop 1 ramp. Like I mentioned, I think we'd be fine to continue on with the projects, at least financially. That would be up to you to decide if you wanted to pull some of those or not. In discussions with the city manager, Alex, determine how we wanted to move forward. But financially, we have the money set aside, and we did that intentionally. The debt service fund, and I'm almost done. So,
You're fine.
No, the debt service fund, we do a transfer from the general fund to help cover the original Utopia debt that was mentioned. That payment for 2021, $2,523,000. We also will receive dividend from UIA, which is actually a return of operating expenses that we paid over a 2 or 3 year period of time a few years ago. Those operating expenses will all be paid back as of 2021. And I know UIA and Utopia are in the process of determining how to handle that going forward as far as a dividend type arrangement. The other money that's up here comes from the Park Impact Fee Fund to cover the bonded debt that I already discussed. This $400,000 in reserve is related to the bonds, so we can't really touch that, but we do have $598,000 that one way or another over the years has built up in this fund to help us cover debt service payments if we needed to. We've already talked about this slide, the street lighting fund, and I think Steve Jackson, our city engineer, is going to spend some time talking about street lighting here, so I'll leave that for him to discuss. And then if we want to come back to this slide and talk about, I know I presented in our all-day budget meeting the option of a $1 increase or the option of a $2 increase. And then there was discussion about where do we want to be on street lighting. So I think his presentation will probably help with that, so we don't need to spend a lot of time there. And that's what we've got. Are there any questions about any of that?
I know you don't have a crystal ball. You've told us that multiple times, but when will we see sales tax figures and know what the impact is going to be? And
So at the end of May, we'll get the report for March, and I think that'll be a very good sign. I mean, it'll tell us exactly what's happened because most of March has been shut down, and, you know, to some extent. And so we'll be able to see in May what kind of an effect, and we'll be able to do some analysis on ramp funds, B&C funds, sales tax, tourism, all of our different taxes that we have that come in. The only one that shouldn't be affected is property tax. And so, you know, and this time of year, property tax is minimal anyway. We've already received the bulk of that in December and January. But
Well, and we
in
know-
May, we'll be able to tell. Unfortunately, we'll have to adopt a tentative budget, which at this point, I would probably recommend we just go with what we have. And then from once we find out about the numbers towards the end of May, we could probably have a couple of meetings to determine if any adjustments need to be made before we actually adopt a final budget around the 20th of June. At the same time, if we don't feel like adjustments need to be made at that point, we can wait a couple of months. And I know that Alex in the past, in other recessions, has given directives to departments to hold on. You know, don't go out on July 1st and make all your big capital expenditures. Let's wait 3 months, let's wait 6 months. You know, that would be up to him to decide, and with your advice as well.
What did we see? You mentioned the Great Recession. What did we see with the dealerships and cars during that time?
During that time, I did some analysis the last couple of weeks. They dropped about 30% in the recession, and they make up about 15% of our sales tax. So it's a pretty good chunk. One of the other large ones dropped about the major retailers. So if you looked at maybe the 4 or 5 big box stores that we have, they dropped about 15%. Grocery was up. Car auto repair things were up a lot during the 3, 4, 5 years that we were down. The other part that's kind of deceiving about that is, so you say auto dealerships are down 20 to 30%. Well, the other problem with that is they're not going up, but all of our costs are still going up, right? So that if you compound that, it's really more than 20 or 30% because really we had been growing at 5 to 7%. So if there's a combination of things that happen there when your expenses are still going up because the cost of things continues to go up. Anyway.
Yeah, and we have the added benefit of our clothing stores and those things being shut down versus back in 2008, you could still go to, buy clothes. You can't now. I mean, these stores are shut down. You mentioned the big boxes, and there are plenty of people still shopping there, but there's a lot of operations we're just not going to see sales tax revenue.
Right.
Just none.
well, and I think it's going to get worse. I mean, we'll have 3 weeks of March-ish in those, the report that you say is coming out. We're going to have the whole month of April, who knows, into May. And I had asked Morgan about, the unemployment numbers, if there was a way to pull out just Layton City out of the numbers that were released to see what that impact is going to do, because they're not going to be shopping at the big box stores anymore if they don't have a job. So, I mean, I think it's even going to be worse for the April month than it was what's projected for March, because there's so many more impacts going to be hitting that. So I'm real nervous about this. I don't know how the other new people feel, but having never done these budgets before, and, the weight of the responsibility, make sure we get it right, and then have all these unknowns thrown, to me, is really kind of scary.
Well, one thing that you can be comforted in is that the city does have good reserves. I mean, we are in a good position. We're not down at the bottom of what the state allows us. We're actually towards the top at the end of 2019. And we're not going crazy this year, spending. I mean, we're following the budget. If anything, we're a little below on expenses than where we could be. And up till January, revenues were doing well, right? And so it's not like we were having a bad year up till then. December was actually the highest month we've ever had. I redid those numbers just a little bit from what I had reported last time, because when I get the January numbers, I notice there's actually, December wasn't as high as I thought it was going to be. And when I got January, I realized why. There was $400,000 worth of December revenue in January's report. And so I rearranged that. And so we were at $1,806,000 in December, which is far exceeds where we've been before any time, even before the Great Recession of '08. So December was great. It added a little cushion to us, about $350,000. And January was right in line with projections. You know, of course, February may have slowed down a little. I don't know that things were really closed in February. So February would probably be fine. If not, actually probably better, because a bunch of people ran out and spent a bunch of money. And so it'll probably do pretty good.
So Tracy, come June then, because I know we got to, go through the timeline, and that's when you would have April's projections at the end of the month, but realistically, we're 10 days ahead of the end of the month. Do you feel pretty confident in being able to maybe just project those last 10 days so that we can kind of have a more realistic number to kind of...
Well, I think we could at least take March and see what that does and assume that April is at least that bad, right? Or
Right.
maybe even a little worse. And we can project it that way and look at it, yeah. I won't have access to any of the actual numbers in
Until
time
the
for the
end?
June 20th
Okay.
meeting, unless by some chance they happen to issue it, a few days before, but they don't usually do it until 27th or 28th, so that's a week after. I don't think they're going to do it a week before. They normally do.
Well, let's hope that the economy doesn't have the same kind of systemic problems that it had back in the recession. So, I mean, it's not like you said, it's not like we were struggling before this. So hopefully when we overcome this, that the economy can just get back going again. It won't take a couple years. That's the hope.
Right.
My question is more general. When's the last time we did a budget amendment in the city, and maybe what was the procedure? Was it a small one, or have we done large ones in the past that we can maybe do? I could do some research on.
Sure. I could provide you with a list of what we've done a lot of times, and I guess actually I haven't done that this year yet. We'll do a mid-year budget amendment, because as long as we don't spend more in a department than what's budgeted, we can kind of pile those up if they're small and do them all in kind of a lump, so that we don't have to advertise a public hearing for every meeting, for every $3,000 thing we want to do. So usually I'll do a mid-year, the last few years I have, and I'll bring a list of here's amendments that have been proposed. I would say that all of those have been discussed with the council in a meeting, in a work meeting at least, to say we want to do this or we want to do that. Off the top of my head, I don't remember which ones we've done so far this year, but I can provide you with a list for sure of what we've done in the past, and I can even get one together of what would be proposed in a mid-year adjustment.
Okay.
And we'll always do, at the June meeting, we will amend this current year budget to what it actually is, and then we'll adopt the 2021 budget. But like I said, we do like to come in, mid-year or something like that and handle a bulk of those if there's been a bunch. And I just don't recall there being a bunch in this year that we would need to handle.
Yeah, I think kind of what Councilmember Fitzpatrick was saying is it's kind of, I wouldn't say overwhelming, but it's definitely, we haven't went through a regular budget process, four of us here.
Right.
And so just knowing that we can take it a little step by step, that we can take the tentative budget, then we can see what the world looks like, then we can look at it in June, then we can amend it further along. So it's not like as soon as we sign vote for the June budget that it's good to go and we can't make any changes, that the world may change between June and August, and we can make decisions, not just bad decisions. We might be able to make good ones if the economy starts to ramp up again. So
Right.
that's
Absolutely.
encouraging.
I mean, if we adopt the budget on June 20th and the numbers come in horrific for April, July, we could advertise a public hearing. We have to give 7 to 10 days to do that. We hold a public hearing, we open the budget, we amend it however we want to amend it. Happens again the next month, we could do it the next month.
Okay.
We could do it every council meeting if we want to. We just have to have enough advertising time so that the public knows we're touching the budget.
So I even hate to bring this up, because the last place that I want us to have to look at cutting the budget is in the merit raise system. But that goes into effect July 1st, and we can't go part year and amendment and take that back. I mean, how do we, I'm asking for help because, like I said, having never done this before, like I said, the last thing I want to tell the employees is sorry, you're not going to get a raise. But where that was a large portion of the increase and it starts July 1st, and we probably can't amend that later on unless we don't give it at first and amend it to add it later, correct?
Right. That would be hard to do.
Yeah.
I would say that'd be difficult. But the way where you do have flexibility is in equipment, projects. I mean, we've got millions of dollars scheduled for different kinds of projects. Now, if you don't do them, obviously maintenance and all that kind of stuff just gets further and further behind. So you can't not do it for an extended period. Or like Steve will talk about, if he gets to the roads part, everything just starts to fall apart, right? All your roads are garbage, and then you're spending 10 times as much to get them back to where they need to be. But in crisis situations, one, we have fund balance that we can fall back on, right? And for an initial year, we have plenty, I would say. For a second year, something like, I mean, I'd hate to say this, but something like merit increases might have to go down. They did in the past. They've never been zero, as far as I know, in Layton, but, you know, they went down to maybe 1% or even a little lower than that. Some cities just didn't give one if it got that bad. And then you eliminate large equipment and projects and, you know, big projects that can be pushed out a little ways.
Yeah, and I think it goes to that with the community that we have to make sure that the city doesn't feel insulated in a bubble from what is going on all around us. 10 million people lost their jobs in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So we're not looking to cut staffing, but the merit pay has to be on the table. It just has to. And so I think that's something I think we've as a council will probably want to look at more closely, but we're not looking to have people not have a job. That's going to be here, but they can't have a job and have a pay increase when the world around them is falling apart. So that's something we'll have to conceptually discuss, because I think you're right that you can't really give that on July 1st and then cut it back. You either have to, that has to be the first thing, or it can't happen.
And like I said, I think that's the worst decision we'd ever have to make. And like I said, with the four of us, that, you know, this is weighing on me a lot. And like I said, I would hate to be the one that has to do that, you know, but, and I think that's where I'm asking for staff for a lot of guidance in this as well. You know, you've been through it, you know what the long-term history of recovering from recessions and stuff is. We really don't, except what's maybe affected our own families and things like that. And so, you know, ideas on what we can do and, you know, or what department,
As far as the personnel, as far as the personnel, I'd defer to the mayor and Mr. Jensen to have a discussion about that, and to have you discuss, as council members, discuss what types of things.
Yeah, I
you
think
would
we can
want
do
to
some
be
what if
taken
scenarios.
out.
I think that's what
I
she's
think
asking
that's-
for.
Yeah.
This is, we just related, it's maybe a little editorial, but what we're talking about here is providing, we provide services to the residents of Layton City.
Right.
And the revenue comes mostly from sales tax, and the economy's been disrupted.
Right.
And the beginning of this discussion, we talked about the health order that we're all under. If we don't, as a community, listen, if we continue to do what we're seeing in some parts of the city of people not listening, it will be extended. If that's extended, the businesses don't open. The businesses don't open, no business, no sales tax, services could be cut. That's the reality of what we're talking about here. And so it's all related. As we discuss this, as we discuss how important it is to stay safe, to stay home, to just go out for essential reasons,
It could have a major effect, for sure.
on each one of our families.
Yes.
And we have to think about that when we, you know, as we make these decisions in the next 2-3 weeks. April this will be the most critical month.
Yep.
And that's on all of us to figure this out and to listen, so that we can get the economy, at least here in Layton City, back up again, the parts that have been disrupted. And that's or these discussions will be worse.
For sure.
Anything else on the budget?
Just a comment. I pretty much agree with what's been said, but I don't want to, I guess, cause too much alarm, but I think we would be foolish if we didn't, like Clint and everybody's saying, know that there's going to be a definite effect here. Because I think there definitely is, and we're going to have to look at everything. But I think one thing that for a minimum we should also consider is at least maintain the rate this year on the property tax. I don't know, you could tell us maybe in a future meeting what effect that would have. I don't know if housing prices will rise or fall with this deal, but I think that should be more of a standard procedure that we go through each year to maintain that rate instead of going so many years like we did before to help us bring some money in when we may suffer other places.
Point.
And that, as a council, you'd need to discuss that and see if that's something that you want to do. I didn't bring that to the table because we had a large increase last year. And so I had anticipated that we would maybe wait a couple of years and then start what you mentioned. My recommendation would be either maintain the rate, which you may not have to go that far depending on what housing does, but at least do, I know we heard from lots of people during that truth in taxation hearing process, why didn't you just do 2 or 3% every year? And I think that's something as a council you may want to seriously consider. And you could even do that for this year if you feel that it would be appropriate. I don't have that in the budget, but I can look at it and come up with some numbers if you want. That would push our adoption of a final budget out until the 1st of September. So if you decided to go through truth and taxation, you adopt a budget at the end of June, but you don't adopt a final budget until about the 3rd week of August. The deadline's the 1st of September. And then if, depending on what numbers are doing, you could just say, never mind, or you could go ahead with it under the theory that Councilmember Day has mentioned that, in the past, or at least last year, people said, hey, I'd rather see a teeny bit every year than a big jump every 10 years.
I think personally, I think even if things were not affected by the virus now and things were going good, I would probably still maintain the rate.
Yeah.
And a question, do we have to be on the same timeline as last year, or can you do the truth and taxation hearings earlier?
The way you have to advertise it and the noticing that has to happen, it's the
pushes it
same
back?
timeline pretty much. Yeah.
But I think that's something as a council probably you should have at least in the back of your mind. I don't know that I would want to go after the big increases of last year to increase the rate anymore, but I think we should at least maintain the rate.
Okay.
And I would just request maybe if you could bring what those numbers are in
Yeah.
a future meeting, what that
Yeah.
maintaining that rate would be.
Sure. I'll look at that.
Yeah, I think we're asking for options
Sounds
because
good.
we know that something's going to change. Nothing's going to remain the same
Right.
because it hasn't remained the same now. And we'd like to see the options of how we can adjust if we need to, what would be plausible, what would be, but the thought of keeping it as we see it now just doesn't seem right now. Okay. After March and April, maybe a different story. Okay. And, but I think those are the things, if we can see anything that says these are, what's the word I want? Not opportunities, but these are ways, I don't know how to say it. Anyway, these are some of the things we could do. So we're not firing off our hip thinking this sounds good and it really creates more problems similar to what you said.
Well, that's
know.
that's basically what I was saying when it's called a what if scenario.
Yeah.
What if this happens, or what if we adjust this section, or what if we adjust this much? That's what I
Yeah.
think they're looking for.
Well, even along those lines, I think it's great we have the reserves, we do, but
Sure.
I don't really want to go and just spend all those in 1 year either, because we don't know. Certainly we have them there, but I don't think you should deplete all those funds just to one swipe either.
So if housing goes the other way, then the rate's going to go up anyway, right? It's a certain amount that you get, not necessarily a rate.
Right. Exactly.
So we have to see kind
So
of
the
what houses.
idea of maintaining the rate, you would actually bring in more revenue. Because as it is, if housing goes up, our rate's going to go down. We get the same amount of money that we adopted last year, plus a little bit for new growth. So if we maintain the rate and housing prices have gone up 7% over the last year, then it would be equivalent to a 7% rate increase as far as our revenue goes. Like I say, that might be more than what you want to do to maintain the rate, but it's
But if it goes down,
right.
then the rate, it'll happen anyway. But it won't be more.
Right. So then you would actually just be pushing to do whatever percent increase you want to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, council, you feel good about that so we can move on?
So I can bring those numbers back next council meeting if you'd like. That'd be fine.
Yes, we'd appreciate that.
Have to buy one on Amazon.
You might not get it till May, though, I heard.
Okay, that concludes the budget discussion. So up next would be Chad Wilkinson, and we'll give him a second because I know we want to make sure we do the adjustment as far as the amount of people in the room, the fact that we're spread out. But Chad's going to give us an update on the cottages at Valley View.
Hello, Council, Mayor, how are you? Good to see you. I just want to give just a brief update on where we're at on the cottages at Valley View. I guess you could say process would be the best way to describe that. As we talked about in a previous meeting, over the last several weeks, we've met with each of those property owners that came to your January 16th meeting. We went to their homes. We had them walk us through the issues that they had, concerns that they had. We made a careful list of those, came back, compiled that list of issues, sorted through it so we could know what were actually code issues and what were just issues that have to do with quality of workmanship or just things they would need to work out with the developer. After putting that list together, we reached out to Ovation, had a chance to meet with representatives from Ovation. And just to summarize what we found, the predominant issues really boiled down to two things is in terms of the code issues on site. First, it was grading. We found several of the lots that needed to have either regrading or just finish grading in order to meet code. There were a number of those original folks that had those issues, and I think that's probably the predominant issue. A second issue that was brought up was connection of the footing and foundation drains to the land drain system. So the city did our own camera investigation, sent a camera down the pipe from the street side and looked at those connections. And we did identify some areas that needed to be either further investigated to make sure the connections were correctly made or areas that needed to be repaired. There were some that we could see that looked like either through the finish grading or the landscaping process, things had happened that they were not, they had either been damaged or perhaps were not installed correctly to begin with. So we did identify those. Once we did that work and identified those issues, the code-related issues, our next step, again, was to meet with Ovation. We met with Ovation and explained to them those issues, and we gave them deadlines to have those code issues resolved. So over the last week or so, a little bit over a week, I've been reaching back out to those property owners, explaining to them. Can you not hear me?
I can, but I think he's
I can eat this
recording.
thing. I need to get some gel to do this after Tracy, but after that initial meeting with Ovation to explain the issues, we did reach back out to the property owners. I've contacted each of them either by email or by phone over the last week or so, explained to them what the next steps would be, told them that we would be out there with Ovation, identifying areas that need to be regraded, which we've done. Our inspectors have gone back out there, identified areas that did not meet code, and they've marked those, and we'll be working on regrading some of those areas. Some of it will require removal of landscaping to regrade the areas. And so that's been over the last week or so. Just to give you an idea of those deadlines, I wanted to make sure that you're aware. So we had a deadline today to have some of the initial research work done to see what needed to be fixed and to identify areas that were going to require regrading. That was done over the last 2 weeks, and that deadline was today, but we've completed that initial work. The next deadline is April 9th. By April 9th, they need to complete the video inspection of those land drain lines and provide us with what their plan is to fix any problems. If those connections haven't been made, they're planned to make those connections. We suspect that some of what's happened there is that when the installation was occurring, there was dirt that got into those lines, and so it makes it impossible to see. But it may just be something that needs to be cleaned out, and so that'll be identified through their further video inspection.
Chad,
That's required by April 9th.
Chad, could I ask you a question on that one? So are you saying it's Ovation's responsibility to do that?
It is. Yeah, we've done our initial video inspection. We identified the areas that they need to do further inspection for us. We were coming in from the street. We've asked them to go in from the cleanouts and come back the other direction and show us that those are properly connected.
Okay.
So, that has to be done by April 9th with, again, remediation measures identified by that time. And then the last deadline is May 1st. So May 1st is their deadline for completing the regrading of the areas around the houses that didn't meet code. They'll have to complete any repairs to those land drain, footing drain connections that are identified during this video inspection process. We've told Ovation very firmly that work has to be done by that time, and if it's not completed by that time, that we will withhold inspections, we'll withhold further building permits until that work is done. Now, I want to put one caveat. If you remember last spring, it was a very wet spring. And it's not to anyone's advantage to get in and do that work if those same type of conditions persist for the month of April. If it's a normal spring, though, that would be a typical date you could have that grading done. So we're going to watch the weather. We've also been very careful to tell Ovation that any type of extension of that date will come from us. That has to be something that the city agrees to. It's not something that just when we get to May 1st, we just say, oh, it was too wet. That's not the way it's going to work. It's going to be, we watch the weather very closely and we extend that as needed, but it's going to come from the city if that needs to be done.
Hey, Chad,
Yes.
on those same lines then, knowing that the equipment is in and off the property and attracting a lot of dirt out onto the street, I know that was one of the concerns was brought for us as well. So I imagine that will be something that we'll make sure they maintain as well, right?
Yeah. We're going to still maintain the SWIP, their stormwater pollution prevention plan, all those things they have to do to keep those streets clear and clean. And yep.
Thank you.
Do they, sorry to interrupt, do they have other work in the city?
They do.
Okay, so when we say we're not going to sign off on permits because they have permits or not permits something coming, did I say that wrong?
I'm just not sure I
If you're
understand.
telling
I have the
them,
same
if
question,
you're going to
Dave.
say, if you don't get this done, there's going to be some issues with your permits, your other permits? Are there other permits there can be issues with?
Well, so we would withhold any permits or inspections on the cottages at Valley View development. If you're asking, would we withhold them on other developments they're working on?
Yeah.
I don't think we have any plans to do that. They have other work that they're doing. That we're focusing our efforts on this subdivision. Gary may want to weigh in on that, but our plan right now is to keep it. There's plenty of reason for them to be motivated.
They've already moved in, so it's not going to be the house there.
Well, but also please understand that there are a number of houses that are not completed up there at
Right,
Valley View.
okay.
So
That's
holding those permits, holding
Okay.
those inspections will be a
That's-
good motivator.
That's
Yeah.
what I want
That
to
was
hear.
my question too.
Yeah.
Just how many? What were they going to feel a desire to do this
Yeah,
if they're already moved in? If it's only specific to Valley View and not their other developments, if there's developments that they're going to have to be stopped if they don't meet these deadlines.
Well, there's plenty of motivation just because there's a number of lots that haven't been developed on yet up there. So we feel like that's good motivation for them. That's it for me. That's the steps that we're taking. That we'll watch those deadlines very closely. They did submit some additional information to us related to. There were a couple of other issues, a couple of internal issues on some of the homes that they're coordinating with those individual homeowners. And then they've got one other issue related to a drainage pipe system that was installed that they've got to make some modifications to. We got that plan, received some alternatives today. We'll take a look at those and see if those will work and then implement those by May 1st.
Okay.
Do we normally do that? Check the drains?
Check the drain system.
Drainage? Do we send
Did we?
the camera
inspection.
down.
Talking about the camera
Yeah.
work? No, that's not something we typically do.
Okay.
So this was something just to see how those connections were and if there were problems with them.
But you just look at the hookup. That's
Yeah,
the idea,
yeah,
and say,
that's right.
okay, it looks good. Now
Yeah.
bury it.
That's right.
Okay.
And it appears that a lot of these issues with the pipes, with the connections and things, may have occurred during the finished
Grading of
grading
it,
or the
sure.
landscaping, where they
Driving
just
over,
had
yeah.
problems that connections were broken or pipes bent or whatever the case may be.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask a couple questions on that, but first I'm going to say, for full disclosure, one of the most affected houses was my brother's, especially on the land drain issue. And along your question, Dave, it's my understanding as part of the inspection process of the city that all of those land drains, storm drains, all the lines, culinary water, as we were touring the public works, we stood there right with the camera truck of the city, and I asked specifically Steve Jackson, you mean we camera or we contract camera every connection and every line? And he said yes. So
Steve's back there, and he can correct me if I'm wrong. I may be wrong on that, but I didn't think that was a typical practice, but I could be wrong.
So that's a question I have then.
We can maybe bring Steve in to answer that question.
Because if it's not part of our standard inspection of a subdivision, which I understand that it is, that you get whoever to come in and camera those lines before they're ever turned over to the city to make sure that they're all up to par, including the connections. So the question I have here on this subdivision is, and I'm not here to throw anybody particularly under the bus, and my brother and the residents up there aren't either. The first day that they came here to the city wasn't to necessarily throw somebody under the bus here at the city, but it was to solve the problem so people in the future wouldn't have to go through the same thing. So if are requiring land drains in a subdivision and we're not inspecting them, or they're not getting inspected, then we're not doing our job, I don't think, as a city. So
I'll talk to the second part of that, but Steve's coming in maybe to talk to that first part of that question about the camera work.
So part of my comment here is if I want to see, when this thing's all said and done, I want to see what inspection process we're going to go through in the future to guarantee that these people don't get into the same situation that we had here. Because my point is, for instance, on the land drains, if it's a city responsibility to inspect those, which I think it should be, like all the other infrastructure, to make sure that those are cameraed, that the connections are made. I mean, they would have saw that my brother's wasn't connected right when they did that work. So somehow that, if it is a requirement, failed to happen. And so I just want to see the inspection process, how it's being revamped to make sure that those things don't happen again for people in the future.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
So I can speak to the inspection requirements for the infrastructure. The requirement for both of our sewer, our land drain, and our storm drain is that those are televised in the mains. So out in the street, we require that those lines be televised prior to a final approval. Every one of those mains will have the laterals connected to those. However, we do not require a camera to be sent up into the laterals each individually because the homes are not connected to those yet. So we can verify that there's a connection to the main and that connection is adequate and properly connected at the main. However, as the homes are built, that's when the laterals are extended into the lots and into those homes. So,
Okay, so what you're telling me is it should have been cameraed and inspected
it was
on the main,
cameraed.
and that's all I'm asking about is the
Yes.
main. I'm not talking about the laterals going to the houses. I'm talking about the main.
Every lateral and every main in that subdivision was inspected and provided a report to our office. However, those reports are done prior to the homes being constructed. So the laterals, the video that we have just shows the connection of the lateral to the main. It does not show the connection of the home to the lateral.
So whose responsibility is it after that?
My crews watch everything to the back of the sidewalk, and then when community development has their permits for the buildings, that's when the laterals are connected, and community development is kind of the trade-off there. So,
And if I recall, that's exactly what you said when we were at the Public Works, the curbs where you switch from them to
the
you.
back of the sidewalk.
Yeah,
is
back of the sidewalk
the back
property
of the
line there.
right-of-way.
So what do we have in the future as far as inspection to make sure that happens.
So maybe before we go forward, just to clarify Steve's point, the additional review that was done was taking those cameras down those laterals as far as they could see. So that's the part that I said would normally not occur, right?
Yes,
we usually don't.
that normally does not occur, but in this case, because we were told that there were potential issues, we did have the laterals cameraed all the way in. It's a specialized piece of equipment that they brought in to do that camera from the main into the connections at the home.
So that normally wouldn't happen. But to answer the second part of your question, then our inspectors do look at those connections to the footing drains as they do their inspections of the footing and foundation. So they are taking a look at those footing drains, making sure that they're connected.
So somehow, and I've been up there, not only my brother's house, but other houses there, somehow that's failing, I think, because I've seen them laying there and even they've said, well, there's the drain. It's sitting on top of the ground and it's been backfilled.
Well, there was we have some issues up there with the foundations being put in, at a different elevation than what was originally intended. Some of those, though, we did see that there were some that were, I guess they had a different plan for some of those drains to go off the back of the hill. We've talked about that a little bit. Is that correct, Steve? And we stopped that from happening. So you do have some of those drains that are still kind of hanging out there out of the back of the lots.
Well, my brother was one. It came out of the back of the house and then was buried.
Yeah. So there are some of those there's some of those, though, that one thing that needs to be, and this has been something that we've kind of had to help the residents understand, is that those footing drains are not there to provide for surface drainage. So, you have surface drainage that comes down from the rain, hits the grass, hits the dirt. That's not what the purpose of a footing drain is. So a lot of those, it's just a matter of, now that we've told them you can't do this alternate plan, it's a matter of capping those and burying them and just, getting them back.
Yeah, and I understand they're not for surface water. They're for foundation water.
They're for groundwater.
Yeah, groundwater on the footing of the foundation. So like my brother's house, if that's in the back of the yard and buried, for one thing, it's never going to hit the land drain if they wanted it to, because water doesn't flow uphill.
Your brother's was one of those foundations that was
too low,
not built the way that it was intended to be, and they had to make some changes. They've now remedied that by installing a sump pump to pump that out. But the other ones, the ones that we've seen and we've gone out and done these re-inspections, they were installed where they ought to be. They just need to be below that floor. That's the idea, is to get them below that area that needs to be drained. But they're deep as they run out to the street. They make those connections. And so far, the other ones we've seen have been, I think there was 2 that we had to have that same treatment for. Is that correct?
Yeah, on the west end, there were about 3 of the
2 or
homes,
3?
but
Okay.
only 2 of the homes have been under construction. Your brother's house is one, and then the home to the west, and there's a home in between his and that, or a lot, between those 2 that will probably need that same treatment.
Yeah. So it'll be 3 at the end of the day, 2 right now, but we know that those are out there. But what we've observed on the other ones, we have some that we need to have some repairs done. The others, we just couldn't see down the line, and maybe there's dirt blocking that, and they can clean the dirt out and verify that those connections have been made. But we've had, again, some confusion about, how is that going to take the water that's standing on my lawn out to the street? That's not what they're there for. They're not.
Yeah, and I don't think, from me personally, I have not heard from any of the residents that that's the concern. The concern is the basement water and stuff.
We heard that, though.
Yeah, I know you have. So my point here is just more, how in the future we're going to assure that doesn't happen again. And I know, I don't remember if it was the last time you gave the update or what, but I did see one positive thing there on the inspection form, or what was presented, that it would be inspected, the level of the footing compared to that land drain is going to be more closely inspected in the future, so to avoid that problem.
Yeah, what we noted was that, on that particular issue, we had good record for most of those homes that inspection had been done. We did have one instance where there wasn't a good record of that. We're making some adjustments. To answer your question about the process going forward, we've started working on a number of items to try to address this issue. One of the things that I've asked my building inspectors to do is to come up with some detailed checklists to make sure that things are looked at each time that we're going out to these homes, and making sure that we have a detailed checklist that says, I need to look for this, I need to look for this. And that's partially just to make sure we're having consistency. Each individual is a little bit different the way they approach these inspections, but we want to have some consistency there. Another thing that we've done over the last year that's very, I think, important to note is that we've done this, or we've instituted an online review. And that what that has accomplished for us is now we have a system that can prevent someone from calling for inspections, for a final inspection, for example, until all the other inspections have been completed. So we have a way on this system to essentially put a stop sign at final inspection that says, have all your other inspections been done? Now, in the past, it was up to the developer to call for those inspections at the right time. So it's possible that somebody calls for an inspection out of order. They say, hey, we were going to get you out here for our framing inspection when they should have called for another one before that. That was really, we were putting that on the developer to make sure that that was being done in the correct order. Now we're going to have a system that says, hey, you don't get a final inspection until all these inspections have been done, regardless of what order they are. Another thing that we've talked through and that we're going to start an education process with the developers. One of the big issues that we identified at this particular development was the final grading not being done correctly. So one of the issues there is weather. And when you get to a certain point of the year, it's not good to be doing that final grading. It's actually, it could be damaging to do that final grade at a certain time of the year. But we also recognize that it's got to be done before that final occupancy occurs to prevent some of these drainage issues from happening that happened up there. So we're going to start an education process this summer saying that if you anticipate you're going to be looking for an occupancy permit around those months of the year, November through January, February approximately, where you can't get in there and do that grading work, you need to anticipate that, and you're going to have that final grading done before you get to that final inspection and certificate of occupancy. What that'll mean is that they just have to plan ahead. There's ways to do that. There's really no reason why you can't have it done and still be framing and doing all the work that you have to do. It just requires better planning on their part to get that work done before that season hits. So that'll start with an education process around June or July saying, hey, we see that you're at this stage in the development. You need to be looking ahead. And if you're going to want to get certificate of occupancy, this has got to be done before that time period hits. So that will be something that'll be instituted. It hasn't been done in the past, but we're going to move forward that way.
That sounds like a good step forward. However, an example with that subdivision up there is you could tell them that, and they would grade the side yards. They're only 5-foot side yards or whatever. They're so narrow that you can't hardly do anything to the next house. So you could have that all graded out. And what they've done up there in many cases, and you can see it if you go up there, is then they go and build the house in the lot next door, and they're intruding all over what they've graded on the previous house that's got an occupancy permit, and basically messing up the whole thing of what was already done.
Yeah, they're going to have to plan better on that and get that done during the right season so that we have those. I can't promise they're not going to have to go back and, especially with houses that close, and impact those other homes, but that's going to have to be done during the right time of year so that we have things buttoned up before we get into that wet time of year. So it's going to require some planning on their part, and it's going to require an education process for us to educate the developers that this is what's going to have to happen going forward.
Okay, so what I'm mostly concerned about, and I think you guys have moved in the right direction, a lot of things with this subdivision to help the inspection process, is it's you got to understand how important that occupancy permit is, that everything's taken care of code violation wise beforehand, because that's what took all of their bargaining with the builder up there away. Once they got the occupancy permit, they had to close within so long, and then builders, if they've got their money, they're a lot less likely to come and fix things than if they don't.
I appreciate that, Tom. There is a flip side to that, though, and that is that we have a lot of times the pressure coming not from the developer but from the homeowner themselves to get that occupancy permit.
I understand that as well.
There's a balance that we have to do there. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times these homeowners, I've been given this example because it's a true life example from my life as an inspector, a young inspector, where it's Christmas Eve, there's a moving truck parked outside the door of the house, they're asking for occupancy and things aren't all the way done. Those are difficult positions to be in as an inspector and as a city staff. So we want to make sure that we're balancing that correctly. And, like I say, it's not as simple as just saying that, there's people that are going to be pressuring for occupancy that are not a developer, that are just an individual homeowner. And we have to be able to balance that process. As an example, while we're going to require that final grading be done, we're still going to allow for some time to complete the landscaping. A lot of times it's the individual property owner that's that's taking care of the landscaping. In this case, it was the developer, but it's not always the case. Sometimes it's that property owner that has to take care of that. So we want to be sensitive to that, require what meets code, but also acknowledge that some things, there is, good reason to delay those things for the property owner's sake.
Yeah, but I still think I still think it should be done before the occupancy permit is issued, even grading. And if a homeowner wants to move in, then he ought to realize that too. And if he wants to go in and disturb all that grading that's been done, well, that's on him after that,
Yeah,
because it did pass the inspection at the time.
We totally agree. And that's the way we're going to go from here on out. That final grading is going to have to be done before they get a C of O, certificate of occupancy. There's a couple other things, just I guess structurally that we're looking at. Steve and I have talked about, I'm taking up too much time, but Steve and I have talked about some other code amendments that need to be looked at. That would include, in a sensitive lands area like this, we have found that there's just not really adequate room to complete that grading the way it needs to be done when the houses are so close together. So this is a lesson learned. We're gonna make some changes to our codes that will require greater spacing when we have a sensitive lands issue involved, to make sure that there is room to get the grading done correctly. I have my list up, but my computer just shut back down. But some other issues we talked about, we want to have better coordination between a lot of times we'll have some really good work done at the plat stage with geotechnical reports to make sure that things are done correctly. We want to make sure that's getting passed along to our building staff so that they know what those special requirements were for lots, for subdivisions. We've done a pretty good job, but we could do better. We could do better on that, and we acknowledge that. And we're going to put together some processes with this new online program that we can tag lots, tag properties, so that we can get those specific notes on those subdivisions. I could go through the whole list. I don't want to take up any more of Steve's time, but if there's any more questions, we'll be coming back. You'll be involved in many of those process changes because they require changes to our code, and you'll see those in the future.
Chad, thank you very much. And I think the key takeaway here is this is a process that you've developed now that would apply to anyone who chooses to build in this city. And it isn't just singling out any one developer or anything like that. I mean, that's right. It's company-wide, and the fact that it's online. So I think that's great.
Okay,
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Day, you're not done?
No.
What else?
Just quickly, they are concerned, and you addressed it here a little bit, on those deadlines. They are concerned about them meeting those deadlines. And you've got the teeth you outlined here a minute ago, which I appreciate, and I think those would be helpful. But I think it's very important that those deadlines, because as they noted now, we've had a good week of weather last week. Soils are good. Nothing happened with the grading. And I don't know the builder schedule, and I'm not going to judge the builder, but those deadlines need to be firm, and they need to be like you've outlined them.
Agreed.
And one last comment is they were very impressed with you, Chad, on the way that you responded back. My brother specifically and his neighbors said you were always good to email, keep them informed, but that was not the case with a lot of the other city employees and inspectors. But they did signal you out and say that you had done a good job at that, but there could be better communication back from all of the city otherwise.
Thank you.
But you had done well.
We're going to work on that too. Appreciate that.
So thank you.
Okay. Council, given the fact that it's 4 minutes before our regular scheduled council meeting, I'm going to suggest that we do not proceed with item number 4, which is our street light proposal, and that we look for an additional time later, because I think that would warrant some good discussion there, and I'd just as soon wait and give it enough time. So if you guys are in agreement with that, I would say let's go ahead and wrap up our work meeting, take a quick 3-minute break, and
Madam Mayor,
yes,
we have a real light schedule here. Do you want to come back after?
that's a great suggestion. I would entertain that if
I'm okay with that too.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Steve, are you okay to stay around? Okay, very good. Then let's just go ahead and take a quick break, and then we'll come back for our 7 o'clock meeting and then proceed afterwards. Thank you, everyone.